morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. To BTT viewers here in the United States, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving and an excellent holiday weekend. Did you get your Christmas tree? I certainly did. And to those BTT viewers from across the globe, I hope you just had a nice weekend. And you might have gotten your Christmas trees as well. Be sure to share your activities down in the comments below. And there are actually some stories for us to discuss. Of course, Hollywood went on vacation as well, but there was a last-minute rush to get out some stories. I covered most of it last week when they first broke, but a few stories trickled out at the end of the day on Wednesday that we can discuss today. And one is about an animated film that I think is a real gem, and that's from Sony Animation, Hotel Transylvania. I've discussed it a couple of times on this channel, not only because I've enjoyed it, but I happen to be a part of Frederator Studios MCN, and they of course are associated with the director Genndy Tartakovsky, who ended up directing the picture after so many other directors didn't work out. And that's been a very important movie for Sony Animation because it's really their biggest hit to date, and really revitalized their animation studio and made them feel that maybe they weren't making a mistake and they could actually be a contender in animation after all. Of course, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 is strong for them, but Hotel Transylvania is a really big deal for them. And they want to have a success, of course, with the next entry, Hotel Transylvania 2. And a really big story on Wednesday, late Wednesday, was that Mel Brooks has signed on to voice Grandpa Vlad, the father of Adam Sandler's character, and the grandfather to Selena Gomez's daughter Mavis. Now, if you haven't seen the first Hotel Transylvania, I highly recommend that you pick it up. It's very well done. It's not only funny, because it's written by Robert Smigel, you know, TV Funhouse on SNL, Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, that's all Robert Smigel. He's a very talented comedian, and he managed to make something that was funny for all ages, legitimately funny for all ages. And also, Genndy Tartakovsky did a great job with atmosphere. It really does feel like an homage to the great horror films, particularly from Universal in the 1930s, but there's just a lot of atmosphere in the movie. Very, very well done. And I'm so excited to see what they do with the sequel. Sequels are tricky, you don't want to drop the ball, but I think Mel Brooks is a really smart addition because not only does he continue a very important part of the formula for the success of animated movies, and that's they have widespread appeal in terms of demographics. But he's also a very funny, witty comedian. He's, you know, a part of the comedic landscape. You know, you might not be familiar with him today because he doesn't work as much as he used to, but he's one of the great iconic comedians of all time. In just a moment, I'm going to give you a list of his work that you should check out. But again, I think that it's really important to have a film like this appeal to all ages, and having Mel Brooks in there, I think a lot of people maybe will be like, well, I wasn't going to see Hotel Transylvania 2, but I'm such a fan of Mel Brooks, maybe I'll check it out. All right, so why is anyone a fan of Mel Brooks? Well, this is something that you definitely should check out, and you know, you should introduce others as well to it if you can, because it's just good comedy. Now, one is some recordings that he used to do. Started out as a record, now of course it's available digitally, and it's The 2,000-Year-Old Man, and it's an interview he did with Carl Reiner at the beginning of their careers, and Carl Reiner is interviewing Mel Brooks, who happens to be a man who's lived to be 2,000 years old. And so it's just, you know, his reflections, his how he sees the world today, you know, when it was recorded, and it's just a very witty, funny piece. But then Mel Brooks went on to become a very talented writer, director, and actor in these spoof movies. You know, they're very popular even today with Scary Movie and stuff, but Mel Brooks was one of the first people to do it. And he did movies like The Producers, which of course is better known as the Broadway play with musicals, Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick, but that's based on Mel Brooks' iconic film. He also did Blazing Saddles, which a lot of people compared Million Ways to Die in the West to, but of course Blazing Saddles is superior, so that's definitely also something you should check out. Young Frankenstein, one of my favorites, really fantastic movie. He worked a lot with Gene Wilder, as you'll see, but Young Frankenstein, excellent. Gene Wilder is in all three of these movies so far. But Young Frankenstein is a very, very good movie. It popularized the character of Igor to this day. Spaceballs, his Star Wars spoof, very well done. And also Robin Hood Men in Tights with Mr. Cary Elwes from The Princess Bride. Those are all excellent films. You know, they're not going to be as raunchy. I mean, they have their sexy humor. They're not going to be like comedies that are today, and they might not be as fast-paced in terms of the jokes, but I think any student of comedy, or if you're just going to appreciate comedy in general, you should be able to, enjoy, different paces and different styles of humor. And Mel Brooks's humor is very, very good. So check that out, familiarize yourself with his work, and then when you see him team up with Adam Sandler in the, at least in the voiceover studio for this animated film Hotel Transylvania 2, you can feel really good about the somewhat of the history that's being made there with the two of them together. So I think it's a great idea. Now, another great idea, something else I want to talk about, the Deadline noted that Sony is having a lot of really famous actors from around the world voice Grandpa Vlad to do the dubs for other countries. So you're not going to have Mel Brooks try and do it in other countries. They're going to try and get some star power there. So get ready for me to butcher some names, all right? I'm just going to own it, all right? So one of the people they have is Michel Galabru, a 92-year-old Frenchman who's made more than 200 films. Let's see, I'm reading here from the Deadline article. Then also legendary Japanese horror narrator Junji Inagawa, and then Holland's Bram Vandervloot, the most recognized portrayer of St. Nicholas in Dutch TV and film. There's Santa, that's pretty cool. Now he's going to be a Santa vampire. And Belgian veteran Jacques Vermeer. They don't have anything to say about him. But I guess in Belgium, you don't need to say anything. They know how awesome he is. So I'm curious, having these voice actors, does it make you more likely to see Hotel Transylvania 2? Or are you like, pass, I don't appreciate old dudes. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story has to do with the Expendables franchise, which is still trying to, drag itself forward. It's gotten a lot heavier, has a lot more baggage now, and Sylvester Stallone is trying to work damage control as they get ready to release the Blu-ray. DVD and Blu-ray, but they just say Blu-ray these days. So Expendables 4, Stallone wants it to move forward, and people are asking him, and they're like, well, what do you think? Why do you think it didn't work out? And he's decided to say, I think it was the PG-13 rating. I think that, people wanted to see violence, and while I tried to appeal to a wider demographic, all I did was alienate my core demographic. And I can understand that logic, but I would say an even bigger mistake was the script, and I think a lot of people would agree with that, and I think Sylvester Stallone, I love the guy, Rocky, he wrote it, he wrote himself into Hollywood. That's an extremely impressive thing to do. He's produced many of his films. He's just a really stand-up guy who understands the Hollywood business model, but he tries to maintain his artistic credibility. Some would argue he doesn't succeed in doing that, but you have to really give it up to somebody who makes it a priority, whether they succeed or not in your eyes. So I like Sylvester Stallone quite a bit. I got the chance to interview him on the red carpet for Bullet to the Head. He was extremely nice, really personable guy. So I'm always rooting for him. But I really wish that he would have someone in his corner, kind of like George Lucas, who was just straight with him and said, you know what, these movies aren't any good. You really had a nostalgia factor working for you in the beginning, but they've just really derailed. The nostalgia factor is worn away, and all that's left is a badly constructed film. I mean, you wrote Rocky. How can you not tell this is horrible? I think that the only two people who came off well in the Expendables 3 were Antonio Banderas and Wesley Snipes, because I think their characters actually had the most to do, and they kind of had gimmicks built into their characters. I think the cast has gotten too unwieldy. It's just too many people. I don't understand why they have to have a younger generation. I'm like, Stallone, you've picked a younger generation that has, like, no fans. So they're not bringing anybody in. They're literally dead weight on your movie. Just focus on the older actors and give them something to do. I'm tired of these cameos where someone smirks and puts on aviators and looking at you, Harrison Ford, and is like, hey, I showed up. Give me some applause. And I'm like, no, showing up is not enough. You have to actually do something, because, I showed up and paid money to be here, whereas you were paid to show up. There's a real difference there in our situations. So I would like to see them, flesh out the roles and just focus on giving these older actors something to do, because they need something to do. But the Expendables franchise is in real trouble. I don't know if it will continue, because Expendables 3 grossed $100 million less worldwide than the second one, and about $70 million less than the first one. Now, some people might argue piracy, but I really do feel that if the film had been better, this wouldn't be an issue. I mean, it was just not a good movie. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think it had anything to do with the lack of violence. I'm curious to what you think. Did you see the Expendables 3, or did you just totally pass on it? If so, why? And if you did see it, what did you think the problem was? Was it the PG-13 rating? Was it the unwieldy cast? Was it the script? All of this? Share your thoughts down below. Now, for the third story, I thought this was very interesting, and I was like, why is the Hollywood Reporter showcasing all of these comic book writers? And then as I looked at the articles, they were like, this is one of our comic book writers to watch. And I was like, Chris Claremont is a comic book writer to watch. Like what, back in like the 1980s? Yeah, he was. Now today, you watch for his name and then you don't buy that comic. but the Hollywood Reporter doesn't buy comics. They're reporting on the comic book industry, and I think the names that were given to them by the studios of comic book writers they wanted to promote. So I'll go into the list in just a minute and why they're on there from the Hollywood perspective, and a couple of names I think should have been on there if the names made more of an effort. But first off, I just want to say I think it's fascinating that the Hollywood Reporter is even making such a list, and I would wish that this list would have some kind of effect on the comic book industry. I think the comic book industry is in genuine trouble, at least from the big two. More and more, the best comics I read every week are from the independent publishers, largely Image. And I think it's because the studios care so little about the comics. I've heard people say recently, you know, through the rumor, through the grapevine, I guess is the right term, that DC, I mean, if Warner Brothers had their way, they wouldn't even publish the DC comics. They just want the characters for the, you know, the television and the animation and the film properties. And that's just appalling. So to the people on this list, hey, you know what, guys? Instead of just trying to get into Hollywood, why don't you make this a two-way street and use your power, being one of the most powerful comic book writers there are, to bring back attention and credibility and strength to the comic book industry and point out that, you know, this medium needs to exist on its own. It's really the lifeline to the properties. I know some of you will disagree with that, but I strongly feel that if the comic books aren't there, they're what keep the characters grounded. They really, I think they're very important. All right, so who made the list? All right, so number one, surprise, surprise, Robert Kirkman. That's because The Walking Dead is such an incredible phenomenon and franchise for AMC and merchandising and in general. He has apparently a bunch of other his comic books have been picked up to be adapted into series by other cable networks, and I think he seems to have some kind of movie deal with Sony too. But none of that has come to fruition. He's totally riding the gravy train for The Walking Dead, and he's earned it. You know, he came up with that. But at the same time, I think that Frank Darabont and those that took it over for Frank Darabont once Frank Darabont unceremoniously was asked to leave. They're also, you know, Gail Ann Hurd, who produces the show. They're all very, very important into the success of. I think it is Gail Ann Hurd. Lauren Shuler, Lauren Shuler, X-Men. Very similar female producers. They work in the same genre material, but Gail Ann Hurd produces, and, you know, I think she deserves a lot of the credit for the success of this show. But Robert Kirkman, he's on the list. Number one. All right, number two, Geoff Johns. Why? Because he is the chief creative officer at DC Comics, or DC Entertainment as it's been rebranded, and he actually has a lot of input in the DC movies that they've been making, like Green Lantern and Man of Steel, and the upcoming Batman v Superman. And, you know, you really have to wonder why would that be number two, considering he hasn't been successful. You know, it's like maybe you shouldn't ask Geoff Johns for his opinion. I think Geoff Johns is really hit or miss. I really hate the work that he's done in you know, live action television and film. I think he can be a very good comic book writer. I loved his Blackest Night crossover back in the day, before this whole, you know, New 52 mess. And I really liked, you know, what he's done a little bit with Superman lately. I thought that was pretty good. And I think that he can do very good work with this Earth 1 series. Batman Earth 1 was one of the best things I ever read. So Geoff Johns can be good, but lately he so seldom is. But he's number two on the list. And I think that's because DC wanted one of their writers on there. It's the only writer on the list. So they were like, put Geoff Johns on there. All right, so who's next? Brian Michael Bendis. I think he actually deserves to be on here. Sure enough, they spotlighted Powers, and they're like, oh, Powers is coming to the PlayStation as their first, you know, narrative fiction show. It's a scripted show. It's so exciting. But then also, I think that, and they pointed this out a little bit, but he's such an important writer for Marvel. He is like their very strong voice. He's done a wonderful job with the Ultimates line. Only his titles have really survived. Ultimate Spider-Man. What he did with Miles Morales is a gift to comicdom in general. And I think what he's doing with X-Men right now is incredibly exciting. And he made, you know, he was the architect behind like Secret Invasion, Civil War, all these great stories that the Avengers had for so long before he switched over to X-Men, because they were like, hey, you know, he wanted a breath of fresh air. But he's an incredibly talented writer, incredibly prolific writer, and really is the backbone right now of Marvel Comics. So he definitely deserves to be on the list, very, very highly. But interestingly, hasn't crossed over a lot into, you know, beyond comics into entertainment. That's why he's number three. Number four, Mark Miller. He's supposed to be advising Fox. He seems to rarely do that. He has a lot of movies coming out. Kingsman: The Secret Service is his. Kick-Ass obviously was his. And then they're also doing the new, oh, I forget the name of it. It was so good. It's like Star something. You should definitely check it out. It's one of his most recent comics about this guy who's like a Flash Gordon type character who's like retired and nobody believes he went to space. Then he has to go back to resave the planet. Very, very good comic. Going to be made into a movie. So Mark Miller's on here, I guess, because, you know, he's somewhat influential. And I think, you know, Mark Miller got himself on this list. And you have to applaud that. He's a really good showman and he really gets his name out there. Then number 5, Chris Claremont. I don't understand why Chris Claremont is on this list. He gave some kind of story about being the one to talk Fox into finally making the X-Men movie. He said they were going to put it in turnaround and I saved it. And of course he wrote the treatment for the Gambit film that's coming up with Channing Tatum, and he, you know, co-created that character along with Jim Lee. But I just think that Chris Claremont, you know, I think that his style of writing worked very well when he was in his heyday. But I think today it's, you know, he hasn't evolved with the medium or the trends in storytelling in general. I think that Frank Miller changed comics, Alan Moore changed comics in that pivotal time with the Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One and Watchmen, all those great comics. And I think that started a trend that, you know, kind of created a divide, and Chris Claremont stayed on like a Silver Agey kind of, you know, Melrose Place kind of path, and then everybody went in the other direction. And I just think Chris Claremont just has an antiquated style of storytelling. So I think he's an important comic book figure, but one of the most powerful comic book writers working today, I don't think so, unless Fox is about to sign some incredible deal with him, which I think would be a huge mistake. So those are the 5 people who made the list. Just to paraphrase again, just so in case you don't remember: Robert Kirkman, Jeff Johns, Brian Michael Bendis, Mark Miller, and Chris Claremont. Who do I think should have been on the list? I think Brian K. Vaughan should have been on this list. And the only reason he's not on this list is he doesn't work hard enough. He's not a Mark Miller. This is a guy who goes around saying, yeah, everybody wants to make Saga into a TV show, but I don't. So I've actually made it so it can't be a television show, and I don't want it to be. And it's like, what are you doing, Brian K. Vaughan? You just shot yourself and your property in the foot. And it should be a television show. It would be a great one. But Brian K. Vaughan, writer of Saga, fantastic comic. Why the Last Man, one of the greatest comics ever written. It got stuck in turnaround, I believe, at New Line. The rights are, I think, free again right now. So hopefully he does something with that. But Brian K. Vaughan should be a Robert Kirkman, and it's a real shame that he's not. And I think it's partially due to circumstance, like Why the Last Man getting stuck in turnaround. That could have been a Walking Dead. It could have been The Walking Dead before Walking Dead, but it didn't have any zombies in it. But I think that Brian K. Vaughan just isn't aggressive enough. He's not enough of a salesman on his own. And then the other person I think should be on here is Grant Morrison. I think Grant Morrison has done so much. Damian Wayne, he reinvented Robin. He is a wonderful writer, a very inventive writer, but I think he's his own worst enemy again, just like Brian K. Vaughan, because he just goes totally off the rails and ends up making his stories completely inaccessible. Unless, you know, he's like the Dennis Miller of comic book writers. You know, the Jim Carrey joke is, I love your routine, Dennis. I have to watch it with an encyclopedia, though. And I think that's really the way you have to read Grant Morrison's material. You need like an abridged version with cliff notes from the Silver Age, every age possible. I mean, I'm glad he likes to do so much research, but it doesn't make for an entertaining read. So I think those are 2 names that should be on there, and they should work on that, especially if they're making lists like this now. Let's get these people on there. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. Now, the viewer question comes from Michael A. And Michael A had a really good, honest question that I'm sure a lot of people have wondered, and I thought, you know, let's just tackle it head on. It's not a great answer, but I think it should be discussed. So Michael A says, hey, Grace, how do people pitch ideas for TV shows and movies to producers while being in the way, way back when it comes to the movie business involvement? Has something like this happened before? I'm interested to know because I have a cool idea, and I think it would be something that could be instantly marketable yet different at the same time. Thanks in advance, smiley face. Well, Michael, I'm so happy that you're thinking of ideas, and it's really important to be creative. And, you know, I wouldn't spend too much time on it. I'd flesh it out with like an outline and the basic point sheet, come up with like the pitch for it, and, you know, an outline of maybe the first season if this is a television show, and, you know, some of the selling points and who you think could be cast in and what its demographic is. Then, you know, when you're a little guy, there's a very big chance you could get ripped off. So you have to be very careful with your material and who you show it to. Now, how can you get representation or anyone to even look at it? Well, your options are limited, I'm afraid. For reasons because they don't want to be sued, most producers will only look at something if it's submitted through an agent. That's just to protect them, and so you would need to have an agent. An agent's not going to consider you unless you've gone to you've studied screenwriting, you've come up through certain channels. It's very hard to get representation. But I'm going to give you some ways that you can kind of, you know, maybe work your way around that if you want to try and get representation and eventually pitch something to a producer. So one thing is the blacklist. I think this is a wonderful new tool. They've opened it up to submissions. I've talked about this before. Go Google the blacklist, but for screenwriting. Be careful you don't get the NBC show with James Spader. But the blacklist now, you have to pay, but I think it's not too much money, and I think it's reasonable considering what they're offering, and they will get your script in front of the right people for both movies and TV. So the blacklist, that's a really great tool for you. Second, also there are screenwriting competitions, like the Academy has one, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. You just go and do some research. Disney, for instance, is always looking for people, but actually Disney has partnered up with the Blacklist to get talent from there, screenwriting talent from there. So always look for these different competitions and, where they're looking for people to submit. So that's a good way to go. So the Blacklist, competitions, then also try and do a comic book. Comic books are hot right now. They're always looking for material. And guess what? Development executives don't care how many you've sold or how popular it is, as long as it has some kind of buzz. So see if you can get it picked up as a print comic, if you can get a publisher to do it. If not, you can always try and do it digitally. So I would go to some comic book conventions, try and find the ins and outs of how to get that accomplished. Then that leads me into the final option, and that's digital printing. It's very hard to get a book published in like a bookstore, but Amazon and all these different companies, but Amazon in particular, have become quite good at allowing people to just publish digitally. You write it, they work with you, and and I think if it's good enough, they'll promote it. But they'll pretty much publish anything, but they won't promote it if they don't think it's good. But you can at least get it out there to the marketplace. And quite a few people have found success doing this. I mean, look at 50 Shades of Grey. That came out of fan fiction. And there are a couple of really successful success stories that have come out of Amazon digital publishing. So those are the 4 ways I would say you can do it if you don't want to go to school and take the longer route. So again, they're the blacklist, competitions to submit to, comic book, or just digital printing. So good luck, Michael. I hope that's helpful to you. I'm sorry if it's not the greatest answer in the world, but I just wanted to give you an honest answer to manage your expectations and tell you that it is possible, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. All right, best of luck to you. Break a leg. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, I hope you had a wonderful weekend, holiday or not. Write your thoughts down below about today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. Anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.